headquarters of ITN, News at 10, with Trevor McDonald.
The anger grows as all sides join in the budget attack. Firefighters head for a national strike over pay. Mosques are flattened in eastern Bosnia as ethnic cleansing continues. And how this teenager hacked his way into trouble. Good evening. Labour attacked Mr. Lamont's budget proposals today as deception on a massive and unprecedented scale. Referring to the staged introduction of some measures, including VAT on domestic fuel bills, the Shadow Chancellor Gordon Brown said it would mean taxes this year, next year and the year after that. The government admitted changing its mind about increasing taxes, but denied Labour's claim that it had betrayed the people of Britain. Here's our political editor, Michael BRUNSON.
Today, the Chancellor was signing autographs and talking up what he did yesterday. His latest budget would help to win the next election, he said, just as his budget last year had helped to win the last one. That was, you'll recall, the poster wars election. Labour called the Chancellor Batman, certain to raise VAT. At the time, the Prime Minister categorically denied it.
I've made the point before. We have no need and no plans to extend the scope of value-added tax.
Peter.
The Tories talked about a Labour double economic whammy. Now, said Gordon Brown today, we've got a Tory triple tax whammy. More taxes this year, next year and the year after that.
All during the election campaign, Madam Speaker, they put up billboards all over the country saying the country could not trust the Labour Party. Now, I say they should be putting billboards in every town and city of this country saying they can never trust the Conservative Party again.
But the Tories say that their manifesto only promised that we will see the budget return towards balance as the economy recovers, even if their campaign leaflets said that only Conservatives keep taxes low. And the explanation today?
Before the election, we said we had no plans to raise VAT, and that was the plain truth. Last year, yes, it was.
Because the Chancellor says the recession altered things, adding tonight,
no one can guarantee every aspect of every tax for all time.
But other concerns have surfaced today about who will be hardest hit by the latest budget.
The people who will be hit proportionally hardest are probably those who are relatively poor, but not quite poor enough to get the income-related benefits. They're going to be the big losers.
And some Tory MPs are already worried that above all that means pensioners struggling with heating bills.
There's got to be an increase in the basic pension for all pensioners. That's the only reasonable and fair way of doing it.
Well, there is concern about this. It will certainly cause hardship if there isn't some corresponding help given in the Social Security announcement. So we're looking very carefully now for the Social Security Minister's announcements to see what he's going to do to mitigate the effects.
And in angry exchanges across the dispatch box, Labour pressed the same question about the level of compensation through benefits.
Will it rise in full?
Well, the honourable gentleman is apparently inventing an entirely new concept. He is saying that in some way income-related benefits have to be adjusted for particular price rises that occur. That is an entirely new concept.
And with the budget debate just having come to an end for today, two further developments. One is Gordon Brown has fired off a letter to the Chancellor saying that he wants a far better answer than he got in the Commons on this question of whether benefits will go up fully to compensate for VAT on fuel. And the second is that the powerful Select Committee on Social Security, consisting of members of all parties, is going to take a formal look at the imposition of VAT on domestic fuel bills. This is Michael BRUNSON, live at Westminster for News at 10.
Britain's firefighters are heading for a summer showdown with the government over pay. After a meeting with the Home Secretary Kenneth Clarke today, union leaders emerged to say a strike now looked inevitable. They say Mr. Clarke is breaking a pay agreement worked out after their first national stoppage 15 years ago. Here's our industrial correspondent Stephen Cape.
Leaders of the Fire Brigades Union came out of their meeting with the Home Secretary convinced the government would not honour the special pay formula. They had this simple message.
It's not on. We're not having it.
I'm a bit of fight on.
The union claims a strike by firefighters looks inevitable, and its annual conference will be urged to sanction the stoppage.
We're talking about a national strike, and we're talking about us looking at the tactics of how we carry out that action at a conference in May.
The government says firefighters are not a special case.
We're treating the firemen this year in the same way that we're treating doctors, nurses, other professionals in the civil service, all of whom are taking a 1.5% pay increase.
So the government could once again be at odds with fire crews as it attempts to keep public pay settlements down. But the industrial climate is changing, with more unions flexing their muscles. The NUM Mining Union plans a programme of industrial action over pit closures. The RMT Rail Union is calling on its members to strike over privatisation and job cuts. Some Ford white-collar workers have already gone on strike over redundancy fears, and town hall workers are taking selective action over cuts in services. The unions say they're responding to growing anger.
I think a lot of people are very frustrated, feeling very dissatisfied, and that may well translate itself into industrial action on a wider scale than we've seen for a few years.
The last time the government was in conflict with firefighters was 15 years ago. The army was called in then. Ministers will be anxious to avoid another conflict.
Government troops in Angola say they're preparing to launch a major offensive against rebels holding the country's second largest city. The civil war everyone hoped was over burst into vicious life in January when the UNITA rebels rejected the results of a general election. The last time the two sides fought over the city of Huambo, 12,000 people died. As our Africa correspondent Jeremy Thompson reports, the first pictures of that battle tell an horrific story.
The battle for Huambo, the most ferocious conflict in Angola's long history of civil war. For 56 days, these government troops were locked in combat with UNITA's rebel forces for control of Angola's second largest city. A symbolic struggle over the strategic stronghold of UNITA's leader Jonas Savimbi. A city of 400,000 people emptied of citizens and reduced to rubble by weeks of heavy artillery exchanges. It's estimated over 12,000 people were killed. With nobody to bury the dead, many of the bodies were left to rot where they fell. Thousands more were injured in the fighting. But with only makeshift hospitals and virtually no medical supplies, few of the badly wounded survived. Huambo's desperate civilians, cut off without food and water for 2 months, have now fled into the bush, traumatized by war. An injured woman forced to give birth in a field, only to find her baby was stillborn. But there's no let-up in the fighting. Though government troops were driven out of Huambo 10 days ago, their MiG warplanes are still bombing UNITA positions in the city that's become known as Africa's Beirut. The two sides now seem to be squaring up for an all-out battle for the rest of the country. The fighting has never been so intense, creating more death and destruction in the last 2 months than the previous 10 years, as Angola slides hopelessly back into civil war. Jeremy Thompson, News at 10, Southern Africa.
Here, the NSPCC launched a campaign today to end what it called the abuse of children by the legal process. The charity says children shouldn't have to face the ordeal of appearing in court. It also wants the law to be tightened to prevent child abusers from walking free. Malcolm Monroe has the details.
A child victim of sex abuse cross-examined in open court. This NSPCC video highlights the trauma they say no child should face.
Every day, in homes throughout the country, children are abused in the one place they should.
This is the way child abuse victims should be treated, says the charity, carefully counselled and allowed to give their disturbing evidence outside the courtroom. The NSPCC launched their Justice for Children campaign today, warning that the courts are failing child victims of abuse.
We believe there are substantial numbers of cases not being brought to the court because the evidence so far is that the case will collapse because young children are being intimidated by the court process, and we've got to change that. It's not fair to the children, it's not in the interest of justice.
The charity is concerned about recent court cases, such as that of a couple accused of cruelty. Their baby died. The prosecution case collapsed after they exercised their right to say nothing. A Right 1 barrister specialising in child abuse cases says must remain to protect parents wrongly accused.
However tragic these cases are, and they really are tragic, there fortunately are very few of them, about 7 or 8 examples in the last 10 years. So an important protection which we've had for hundreds of years should not go by the board.
The NSPCC insist it's time to tip the legal balance in favour of the child victim, not the adult abuser. Malcolm Munro, News at 10, Central London.
ITN has first-hand evidence of the misery and upheaval caused by the Serbian campaign of ethnic cleansing in eastern Bosnia. With the world's attention focused on UN efforts to get aid into Srebrenica, an extremist Serbian warlord moved into Bajlina and blew up the town's mosques. Muslims in Bajlina have now either fled or are being forced out. Gabby Rado of Channel 4 News has this report.
The people of Bajlina gather in the town's main square to bask in the first spring sunshine. Their enjoyment is marred by the noise of bulldozers. They're levelling the site where the town's main mosque used to stand. 2 hours before the mosques were blown up, all telephone lines from Bajlina were cut. Bulldozers had to finish the demolition job at this mosque because it was only partially blown up to spare surrounding buildings. It was allegedly the work of an extreme Serb nationalist militia we encountered on the streets called the Panthers. Their commander, not seen here, is called Ljubiša Savić, better known as Major Mauser. He wants all Muslims out of Bajlina by April the 15th. Of some 15,000 Muslims who originally lived here, around 4,000 remain. And many of those are now leaving too. These Muslim families are bound for Vienna. The armed militiamen who put them on these coaches out of sight of our cameras say these people are leaving voluntarily. And it's true that they want to go to flee. They're too afraid to say they've been driven out by acts such as the destruction of the mosques. Some Muslims who work at this Bajlina flour mill are prisoners at a detention camp called Batković, 6 miles to the north, which we were not allowed to visit. We were allowed to talk to 3 prisoners hand-picked for us at the mill. 2 Muslims and a Croat. They and some 400 fellow inmates had been at either the notorious Amarska or Manjača detention camps until last autumn. The Serbs call them prisoners of war, while they say they're interned civilians. But they had no complaints about working for no pay at the mill.
I want to work here because time passes more quickly in this place. I volunteered to work here and it's not bad.
The destruction of the mosques here in Bajlina and the fear under which the Muslim population now has to live are an inevitable result of the lawlessness created by war. People on both sides of the community have confirmed to us that local Serbs are generally disgusted by what's happened. But here as elsewhere in eastern Bosnia, the local warlords are out of control and they have a sinister agenda all of their own. They try to keep the destruction of Bajlina's mosques a secret from the world. Every day eastern Bosnia is being cleansed of more of its Muslim heritage and of its Muslim population. Because what happened here has taken place in other towns and will go on elsewhere, unrecorded, until something is done to end the war. Gabby Rado, News at 10, Bajlina.
Still to come on News at 10, asthma, the only childhood disease that's on the increase, why some doctors are getting it wrong. The most powerful man in British television, how his decisions affect every viewer in the country. And the computer whiz kid accused of hacking across Europe, his mother's warning to every parent.
I think anybody who's got a computer in the home might face a similar problem with young teenagers.